details within the chapters are addressed. Normally, it's a spiritual application of that text, which I don't object to it. I just think that when you go back to the context of the original, the people that were there, then you're able to grasp a broader perspective of what the writer was trying to say. You know, it's like someone talking about snow, living in snow and the cold, but they've never, ever been in a snowy place. Can they relate? I mean, now, if you're from a snowy place and you experience winter, really real winter like you guys do here, and you hear somebody talk to you about the winters and the snow and how the snow feels, and they've never seen it personally, never touched it, never experienced how it feels. Wet snow, nice snowflakes. Immediately, you're going to identify these people don't know what they're talking about. They just saw it in the movie, and that's it. Well, with all due respect to the audience, it's the same thing when you study the Bible and you've never been to any of these places and you hear people try to describe it through their lenses of religion, and you know that they really are not understanding what they're saying from its cultural or context or geographical. I tell people when they go to Israel that the moment they go to Israel, just landing in Israel the first day, by the second day, your understanding of the Bible increased by 15-20%, just because you already seen it. Things that you biblically see, and then all of a sudden you go like, oh, I didn't realize it was like that. Now, when you come back home and you read it, and you're going like, oh, I saw that. I remember seeing that. That's if you go with a tour that teaches you. If you go with a tour that goes to other traditional places, your knowledge decreases. Because all you're going to remember are traditional places where nothing happened, right? We went to some cool places. All right, so in Corinth, and when I went to Corinth, man, I had a great time. I got to see, I climbed the Acro Corinth, which is a mountain right there. It's a high place where Aphrodite, the temple of Aphrodite, was located. We climbed that whole thing. And then we got to see the isthmus, which is the neck that connects the peninsula of the southern part of Greece with the rest of Greece. And it was an incredible view. It was incredibly pretty. And I really enjoyed going there. I was really looking forward on going to Corinth just to view all that, to see it. And what I want to do is show you certain things. This is the bema that they took Paul to in the time of Gallio. And what you see in the backdrop there, that's Acro Corinth. The whole mountain, we climbed that whole thing. Okay, now, it was a nice little climb. Believe it. And then we went down to the old city of Corinth, and I imagine what would happen, what would have been the whole scenario in the first century, seeing the whole metropolis, which was basically a connection between east and west. Because if you had a ship, you will be very careful not to go down around the peninsula because it was very dangerous for shipwrecks certain times of the year. It's called Mediterranean travel schedule for ships. And when I was there, as a matter of fact, there's a tree. I was standing on top of the bema, and I was speaking not very loudly. And my wife and my daughter-in-law was sitting somewhere to the right over here under a tree, and I thought they were not really paying attention. But they heard everything I said. And I'm going like, wow, that's interesting. It's actually, it carries a sound everywhere. Now, that's another conversation that I cannot continue because that means that these people were building with acoustics in mind. You know, talk about it going to a different level. It's like, okay, I'm speaking not very loudly. There's people around, and they're hearing me. I'm going, wow, that's interesting. So you learn so much when you go to these places. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to go to some of this information, all the little tags, clearly not all of them, because it will take us too long. But I want you to learn about what we read, a little bit about topography. So let's start with this. Corinth is about 48 miles west of Athens, situated at the western end of the isthmus. Isthmus is like neck, like Panama, the Panama Canal. That's like a neck that connects South America to North America, right? So it's the same thing. The isthmus was a very important place, and I'll show you a video of that isthmus and how it is connected. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's 31 minutes, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and forth on the video, and this is perfect because as I'm talking about the Aphrodite, okay, what you see in the backdrop is the isthmus. You see the Ionic Sea on the right, on the right of your screen, and you see the Gulf of Corinth on the left. Okay, I'm on top of the mountain, Acrocorinth. You follow? Aeonic. Aegean Sea. Aegean Sea on the right of the screen here, boom. And then on the left is the Gulf of Corinth. Okay, so what they will do, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to go right to it. And I went up there, when I took that picture, I'm going, man, I'm blown away. Because now I don't have to pay to get a picture. I basically took a picture of it, and I could use on my teachings. Okay, you have to take pictures sometimes, and you don't have to pay. See how pretty that looks? So what they will do, they will take a ship that will come from your right side of the screen, take a ship. They disembark all the merchandising, all the goods. They carry it over to the other side. They put them on another ship, and they go to Rome. Now, you have to go through there. So that means that logistically, Paul was exactly on the right location in order to welcome everyone from every country that are doing all the business, So basically logistics. It's like me setting shop in New York City or San Francisco or California or Hong Kong or major ports or Dubai, for that matter. You follow? Major ports. Back then were ports of entry through ships. Today's airplanes. You go to all the major hubs, Atlanta, and it's the same thing, okay? Now, in the 1800s, what they did, let me move forward here so you know what I mean. And I'll let you watch this a little bit, but I'm getting ahead of myself, and I want to show you. Okay, this is Cenchrea. Cenchrea is important because when you go to the book of Acts, chapter 18, book of Acts, chapter 18. Okay, let's go there real quick. In the book of Acts, chapter 18, it says right there that they were going to Cenchrea, where he made a vow. Remember, verse 18. I'm going to guide you through here so you see what I'm saying. The chapter, I'm going to show you the videos. It says, so Paul, after remaining many days longer, said farewell to the brothers and sailed away to Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila. He shaved his head at Cenchrea. He's doing a Nazarite vow in Cenchrea, which is about 15 minutes away from, not even, from Corinth, okay? So let's listen a little bit about this, okay? It's interesting that as I travel throughout Athens and I'm in Corinth, I went to Acrocorinth, we went to Thessaloniki, we also went to Philippi. But I'm finding myself in a very interesting location that the Bible tells us about. We just spent some time in Ishmael, which is the city in which they held the Ishmael Games. Very significant to the context of the 1 Corinthians. Now, in the Acts chapter 18, verse 18, says this. So Paul, after remaining many days longer, said farewell to the brothers and sailed away to Syria. And with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shaved his head at Cenchrea. This is the ancient port of Cenchrea. Now, a few events occurred here, clearly. Paul came here because he was going to travel to Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and he went to Ephesus, as the Bible tells us. We were there on our trip, as you remember. So here we know that the evidence, biblical evidence, that talks to us about the archaeological also is included, how the archaeology has found the place. We have the ancient port in which Paul came to here. Literally, we are in the full steps of Paul, and he shaved his head because he did a Nazarite vow. So a lot of the things happen over here. Now, let me read you some extra biblical sources to validate this particular point here. I want to make sure I want to get it for you. Philo, in the works of Philo, complete and unabridged. And he says, Alechium crossing over the isthmus into the opposite Gulf, having arrived in Cenchrea, right here, the dockyard of the Corinthians, right there. He was compelled by the guards, who would not permit him the slightest respite, to embark immediately on board a small transport and to set sail, as a foul wind was blowing with great violence. And it says, and after great suffering, he and difficulty arrived to this place. Now, it's interesting because the book of Acts, chapter 27, verse 9 to 10 says this, and because considerable time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast, Yom Kippur, was already over, Paul strongly recommended, saying to them, man, I appreciate that the voyage is going to end with disaster. I perceive that the voyage is going to end with disaster and great loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. Why? Because he understood the maritime travel. We learned as we were in Troy that they used to know the times and seasons, and they had a maritime travel. Go on Google and you can look it up and you can see, even today, they have basically sea highways, if you can call it that. They go from island to island. So it was in the ancient world. And they used to have maritime travel between early March all the way to September, from September or late September all the way to late February. They would not embark because of the winds, because it was dangerous. And remember that Paul already had an episode that he had a shipwreck. So we know that this is true.
Now, this is one way that you can validate the Bible, by using history. Because then you can go to understand maritime travel, and then you understand what even Cicero will talk about. If you go around the Malays, if you survive that twice, don't think you're going to survive it 3 times. So now the validity of the New Testament is paramount, because now Paul tells us, hey, if we travel now, we're going to end up in disaster. Sure enough, there was a shipwreck. Now, when you read that, you're going like, well, he foretold. He's a prophet. No, he understood maritime travel. There's nothing mysterious about what he said. Everyone would have known it. So now the isthmus, let me move up a little bit more. It's right after. And by the way, just so you know, when I was not supposed to go to Cenchrea on my trip. It's right next to Corinth. It occurred to me as we're driving and say, hey, I wonder what Cenchrea is. And my son looked it up on GPS. Oh, yeah, it's like 5 minutes down the road. We went to Ishmael. I didn't realize they were so close. It dawned on me only when I got on top of the Aphrodite, Acrocorinth, when I looked down at the isthmus, I'm going, wow, it's not that big. It's not so far away. And you see all these locations being mentioned. And I'm going, I just asked a question. I wonder what Cenchrea is. My son says, it's right down the street, 5 minutes. We actually drove past it. It's so unassuming. It's a beautiful a beach, right? But no, that's the place. Seriously? But back in the day, it was very well built and stuff, okay? So then let's go to the isthmus. And this was, to me, a highlight, by the way. Let's go to Cenchrea Port. Let's go to the next part. That right there.
A really cool, exciting place. We are right now in the neck of the northern part going towards Athena and the southern part going towards Corinth, right? We are in what is called the isthmus. It's a neck. And in the time of Paul, that's the Saronic Gulf.
Saronic.
And that's the Corinth, of the Gulf of Corinth. And they have a road, and we're going to go there next. And they used to take the ships, bring them on that road, and pull it to the other side, or they would disembark the people and unload all the goods, and then take them over to the other side, to the Gulf of Corinth, and then reload it on another ship. Now, obviously, that costs money, and that takes a lot of effort. So, in the time of the late 1800s, somewhere in the 1870s, the French engineers, they began to dig this up. Now, the emperors of Rome wanted to do the same thing too, but they had no success. But it wasn't until the late 1800s that they finished this canal. This was an important point of interest back in the time of Paul in the first century, in which it was a very important ports coming from the east, going to the west, Rome. And the moment that this was done now you have ships come through here, obviously not huge ones, but it facilitated
for commerce, and now it's more for tourism, and it's more transport. But it's interesting because back in the day of Paul, in the day when Paul was here, they have to unload and then reload it on the other side. It's about 4 miles. So it's quite interesting what technology can do, and this is what we see today. It's called the isthmus. It's the canal. One of my bucket lists. I always wanted to be here, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to come and see the way it is now than trying to connect the way that it was back in the day in the first century.
These pieces of information, believe it or not, go a long way. Because then you get a glimpse of why did Paul go to these places? Let's not talk theologically right now. Let us talk about more so understanding why Paul went to these places. Why did the gospel spread so quickly throughout the empire? I began to think about that. Huh? Oh, and I began to talk about that. Think about it. I'm thinking, it makes no sense. Why would Paul do those things? And I began to ask questions. I began to say, okay, why would Paul go to Corinth? And I started looking into the history. And I found the importance of Corinth, which made me realize, wow, so this guy was very bright in planning where he was going. It was not by chance, by the way. He is not saying, well, I feel the Spirit's telling me, let me go here. No, you don't understand. He's saying, if I want the gospel to spread quickly, where am I going to go? To the major metropolis. Let me go to Ephesus. They have Jewish communities there. I could eat meat that have been properly slaughtered. I could have a synagogue. There's a community, that I could lean on, and because I'm Jewish, I will be able to. Remember, there was a letter of recommendation too in Acts 15. So he will be welcome everywhere he will go. Okay? Which begs the difference, begs the question. So if they send the letter from the Nazarene Council of Jerusalem, and they send witnesses to all the places. By the way, remember that the kingdom of God in Yeshua was growing. It was very small when these things were taking place. That means that James was well known in Jewish synagogues all throughout Asia Minor. They were not going to churches. There were no churches. They were meeting in synagogues. We never think about that. See, so therefore now the text doesn't have to tell you, oh, they went to the synagogues in the first century. Because if you study the history and you'll know what's collegia, I talked at length that yesterday, then you know they couldn't have met in any other place. It was until they got thrown out of the synagogues, then they did something different. Then they started their own home groups. Which, by the way, it completely diffuses that whole thing today. Oh, we need to do only home groups. No, there has to be community. Back in if you can wait, I'll work as we're recording, but we'll do that. Afterwards, we'll take your questions. But if you think about it, it required community. You cannot survive in the Greco-Roman world, being an individual. And it was illegal to have your own meetings in your own homes. If you get caught, you can be charged with sedition. These are things we never think about. So understanding the importance of community and worship together and, study together and get to know one another, it is extremely important that we know that. That's something that I needed to reevaluate. And yes, after there was persecution, they were meeting in homes. But we're not talking about that time frame. We're talking about the time frame here. You see, there's a real time and space. Like, for example, when you read the prophets, have you ever read the prophets in considering which prophets are contemporaries with each other? Very few people do. They read Isaiah, and they read one verse, and they do the same thing we did in the church. We run verse from here, one verse from here, one verse from there, and we come up with a theology. Well, when you read Isaiah, you cannot read Isaiah and pretend to put them in the same place and space as Jeremiah or later on Habakkuk or later on some of the other prophets, because they were in different locations, and the prophecies were either to the 10 tribes or either to the southern kingdom, and then later on in Babylon, it had to do with the Babylonian captivity. You follow Nehemiah with the whole Persian kingdom. I mean, there are different dynamics going on behind the scenes. We never think about that. What I'm trying to do with you guys in this weekend is to create a different aspect of study. Don't assume that text is written directly to you right now. It's not.
It was written to an audience over here. The principles and the concepts and the motifs of those events still apply to you today, but when it was given to these people living in these environments and living under these laws that we don't know anything about. Does that make sense? Now, once you understand this, they can extrapolate certain things. Oh, I know how it adapts to this now. That's why you have different groups within Judaism. Because you have the Mizrahi, Yemenite, you have Ashkenazi, you have Sephardics, and they have different customs. Do you know the difference between a custom and a law and a ruling? Many people don't. So we criticize the rulings, which are legal by nature, and then we observe the customs, which they're customs. They're not a commandment. Sometimes we criticize the ruling, not knowing that that's legal in nature. You cannot change it. And then we observe the custom as if it was a ruling. Okay, so when you go to Corinth and you saw the isthmus, it is important to understand, it is very important to understand a little bit more about what goes on. So let's talk about what goes on in Corinth from a cultural perspective. Okay, remember, this is Ephesus. And in Ephesus, we showed you about the columns. Notice in the bottom picture, you have the columns here. There's a statue over here of a person. They were not worshiping that person. That is basically a patron. It's patronage. It's called patronage in the Roman Empire. And you see it today when you go to college, and there's a whole wing of a building. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Cold weather. When you go and you go to a building, and you have the whole name of the person who donated the building, that's a patron. His patronage, huge in the first century. Now, what we need to learn about this, and this is important, so what I want to do right now, not read so much about chapter 18 per se, I want to focus a lot on the cultural background behind chapter 18. Is that okay? It says, the term patronage, as used in the first century CE, referred to nearly a universal ordering of social relationship based on the exchange of wealth and influence. This informal system of social stratification had a patron-client relationship at its core. By the way, this week's Torah portion is a classic patron-client relationship type Torah portion. We read about the 10 commandments, 10 sayings, 10 words, the Mount Sinai, given the commandments of God. Well, guess what? God is the patron, we are the clients. And there's a responsibility between the patrons and the clients. We are, both of us, all of us, we are clients of God. We now share reciprocity. So you have patron, client, and between that relationship, there's reciprocity. Let me give you an example. God gives you the commandments. He gives you water. He gives you bread. He gives you protection. You, in return, maintain the camp holy, and then you, in return, are loyal by not worshiping other gods. Right? That's between us and the Creator. Now, between each other, we both serve the same patron. That's why the commandments is written the way that they are. 10 commandments, 10 words. The first 4 words is a vertical relationship between us and God. He says, don't do this, as a relationship of reciprocity. I'll give you a covenant, but you are not to do this because it will be a transgression of the covenant. It comes under the realm of obedience to the great king. The next 6 commandments is between you and me. It's between us. You shall not covet. You shall not murder. You shall not do this. In other words, we are now reciprocal because the king says, if you're going to be serving me as a kingdom, I need to make sure that there's complete reciprocity between the kingdom. I am not to envy what you have. I am not to covet your wife. I am not to do it because we all have the same source of unlimited goods. He is the creator of everything. He has unlimited goods. So we don't have to envy anything. We don't have to, say, oh, I want your stuff, and by doing so, I will lie. I will do whatever it takes. I don't have to do that. In the first century, that was a huge thing. Like when I remember when I learned these principles and I read in the Bible that says, now we're no longer slaves, but we are friends. Wow. when I understood that being a friend of the emperor was the greatest compliment anybody can have. Meaning that we're friends with the Creator. And now that he's my patron, that I'm his client, and I give him complete allegiance and complete loyalty. You know? Wow. And then when it says that we're no longer slaves, but we have been given the right to be called the sons of God. What an honor. Now he adopts me in the kingdom. Now he becomes the ultimate patron, where all the loyalty goes to him. That's what Yeshua came to do. Yeshua came all to direct everyone back to the Father, John 17. I mean, what he said is a classic patron-client relationship. He's trying to be a mediator. For example, when you have a client and a patron, right? And the client wants to meet the patron because he has something that I need. Therefore, there's always a mediator, someone who is the connecting between all of them, right? That mediator is Messiah. He's the one that came for the sole purpose to restore a broken relationship between Israel and the great patron that was established in creation, and then later on Mount Sinai for Israel. Is this making sense? Well, patronage in the first century was very important. It's actually more important than even being a millionaire, because it gives you influence. If you have resources, the ultimate patron was the emperor. Okay? Remember that. This informal system of social stratification had the creation patron-client relationship at its core. You have your flashlight on, by the way. I don't know if you know that. The patron, or patronus, possessed a surplus of financial and political capital, and thus was in a good position to meet the request of one in need, the client, in response to receiving beneficia, which is favors. Haven't we been given grace and favor? That's the language of patron-client relationship. It says, and Server says, the social expectation of the day required the client to repay the patron in a kind, if possible, for only the wise man knows how to return the favor. So when I hear a Christian brother say, oh, well, I live by grace, and, and I don't have to follow the Torah and the commandments or anything like that, because I live by grace, I receive favor. You are an ungrateful client. No one would have had anything to do with you in the first century. Nobody. And the worst type of credibility was that if you were a patron, you took someone in as a client, and then you gave them some of your benefits as a patron, and that person would not do according to the expectations of the patron, then that patron will tell everybody, don't touch him. Leave him alone. Done. Credibility cannot do anything. If we live according to those, cultural background types of expectations, I think the body of Messiah will be completely different. Because then we all are bound to one another. Because we will take care of one another. That's why I'm grateful that you guys treat me well. And then she went out of her way, my sister, to make breakfast for me. I'm grateful. Because, she's been a client. I'm a client of the great patrons. And there's reciprocity. I spent all day here yesterday teaching. And she saw the effort. Hey, can I make you breakfast? It was on her own. Grateful. Thank you so much. That's how the kingdom functions. Helping one another, empower one another, equip one another. That's what they're doing here. And it's sad that today we don't get that. It's competition for honor instead of helping one another please our King, the great patron. Make sense? Okay. It says, failing that, the client was to publicly express his or her gratitude to the patron and always seek ways to repay the social debt. What is our debt towards God? What is our debt towards God? What is the one thing He has given us, a gift that He has given us as a client that we do not deserve? Life. So you will think that we will be completely loyal to Him regardless. Because He's given us something of a unlimited good that He possessed, no one else has. Now you notice when I teach, I always say that we have to honor God the way He deserves because He's good, He's kind, He's righteous, He's just, right? You notice I say that all the time? Do you know why I say that all the time? Because once I learned this, I wanted to make sure that everybody knew how I feel about my patrons. Once I learned these principles, Even the way you pray expresses the gratitude that you feel being a client of the great patron of the universe, who happens to be my patron, my king. And by the way, that I'm grateful that Yeshua the Messiah, his son, gave me access being the mediator of this covenant. Without Yeshua, I'm never going to have the opportunity. I would have never had the opportunity to be able to approach, to be part of the kingdom. And what has this great patron done for me? Let me give you my testimony. Well, he took me out of nothingness, and then he has given me the opportunity to travel 39 countries to teach about his word. So I got a lot to be grateful. You know? There's no way I could have done this on my own. So I'm grateful. And then when you learn these things, wow. He said the client's obligation to the patron could be relieved through a number of ways. For example, the client might make cash installments, provide various services, lend political support, include the patron in his or her will, or simply sing the praises of the patron at every opportunity. If you read the gospel now, read it in the eyes of honor and shame and patron-client relationship. The letters of Paul are permeating with this. Let me give you an example of an honor and shame language in the letter of Paul. Let's go to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1 says, Paul, a slave of Yeshua the Messiah, called to be an apostle, calling himself a slave. Okay, and then he says, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised previously through the prophets in Holy Scriptures concerning his son, who was born a descendant of David according to the flesh, who was declared Son of God in power according to the Holy Spirit by the resurrection from the dead of Yeshua Messiah, our Kyrios, our Lord, through whom we have received grace. That's honor and shame language. Okay, and apostleship for the obedience of faith among all the nations on behalf of his name. In other words, on behalf of the name, it says, among whom you also are called of Yeshua the Messiah. To all those in Rome and who are loved by God, love is loyalty, called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God the Pater, the family, the father of the house, not the emperor. Paul is writing something so significant if only we tap into the culture and the language of the culture in that time frame. That letter, that introduction to this letter to the Romans would have really, really established the father as, it's not the emperor who's the pater familias, the head of the family. It's the God of Israel who sent his son, who empowered him through the resurrection. And he's giving you grace, not only to you, but all nations on behalf of his name. Wow. To carry a good name in the ancient world was everything. Is this making sense to you? It says, it becomes clear that the principle of reciprocity lies at the core of patron-client relationship system. By the kind of exchange of services and influence, mutual interest was served, beginning with the upper echelon of society and continuing to down the chain relationship at the lower levels of slaves. It becomes clear that the principle of reciprocity lies at the core of the patron-client relationship system. But this kind of exchange of services and influence, mutual interest was served, beginning with the upper echelon society, continuing all the way down. So basically, what we're saying here is the whole gospel was preached based on the context of honor and shame, patron-client relationship, and everyone knew it. Everyone knew it. So when Paul is introducing himself as a slave of Messiah, Yeshua, and then he goes on to talk about grace, and he talks about all these things, a reader in the first century would have really captured the essence of patron-client relationship and honor and shame in the message. We don't see it today because we're not in an honor and shame society. You know what I'm saying? So therefore, we never grasp it. Okay, so is that making sense? I need to get your feedback. So it says, and after those things, he departed from Athens and he went to Corinth. And he found a certain Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had arrived recently from Italy, along with Priscilla and his wife, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to depart from Rome. Now, this verse is letting you know the time frame when these things occurred. Claudius during the time of the greatest missionary expansion of the early church, and so played a significant role in the experience of the first evangelist. Luke records that he expelled the Jews from Rome and that Aquila and Priscilla were caught up in the melee in Acts 18:2. Suetonius, the historian, explains that the cause of the expulsion was that the Jews were constantly, they were constantly rioting in porsere Christos at the instigation of Christ. Meaning that it was the issue of Yeshua being the Messiah that created all the chaos and the rioting. Okay, that's why we read yesterday in Thessalonica that he is creating havoc in the whole empire. Because the believers in Yeshua, they're presenting Yeshua as an anti-imperial message. And people are gravitating for it. Why? Because the message is about the real peace. I mean, remember, goods, right? Honor and shame, correct? The emperor will shame you if you did anything against them by crucifixion. So if you're a Roman in the first century and you hear about this man who's Jewish, and by the way, the environment in Israel was such, geopolitically speaking, that, the Romans were taking care of the whole country. And in Rome, they had a huge Jewish population, and now they heard about the Messiah from Israel. And the Romans are oppressive. The emperor is oppressive. They have all these emperors abusing the people, give them bread and games. Keep them entertained while we'll do everything. The same thing that's going on today with the corruption. Okay, same thing. So what happens is the people now, they're hearing about this Messiah, anointed one, a Christos, anointed one, who is actually bringing righteousness and justice. The emperor, because there's famine, and he's a womanizer and a homosexual, and he's actually not taking care of the people. He is oppressing the people versus now the kingdom of God through Yeshua the Messiah is helping the needy, the homeless, the widows, and the strangers. And they are working together. They're honoring one another. By the way, they're treating a Gentile or a slave person with equity. They sit them at the table. They eat together on Shabbat. They do things together. They're not being treated as slaves. They're not being treated as second-class citizens. So, hello, obviously you're going to gravitate towards those people. It grew so fast that now they have a problem. Because then they start saying, well, who is this Messiah? Yeshua. Well, he is the one who brought the perfect peace. But wait a minute, I thought the emperor was. And then they start teaching about the Messiah prophesied in the Torah and the prophets, and they go like, wait a minute, that's a better king than the one we have now. How do we serve him? Oh, if you confess with your mouth that Yeshua is Kyrios, not the emperor. That's sedition. But you must believe that God raised him from the dead. Wait a second. So your God resurrected his son, and he's willing to do it for me too? Is that the gods of Rome and Greece? No, they don't have any power. Well, how do we know he was really resurrected? How did he die? Crucifixion. Get away from me. You mean to tell me that the one that you're serving was shamed by the emperor with the worst type of death, the most dishonorable death, and the God of Israel resurrected him? What do we have the evidence? 400 people saw him. Really? So the God of Israel has the power over life and death, but I thought it was the emperor. Well, he killed them unjustly, the Romans did, but God vindicated him, reversed his status from shame to honor by the resurrection. That's why the cross went from shame to a sign of honor. Now, this is what these people are dealing with in the middle of persecution. That makes sense. It's a lot in it. Because all we're doing is understanding the gospel backdrop of the message. Why would a pagan Gentile who can just have sex with anybody and it's called worship? Let your flesh do whatever it wants. It's worship. I could have sex with another dude. I could have sex with a slave woman. I could go to a temple and have sex up there. And it's not really, a bad thing to do because it's actually dedicated towards a God. So it's worship. Why will those people reject the freedom of the flesh to submit to a God of Israel who tells you exactly what not to do? Between man and woman in a marriage relationship, knock yourself out. Just don't do it like they do it. No, seriously. God never prohibits having the sexual experience. He says, under the condition that you do it in this way, so that way no one is saying that you're doing fertility rituals. You know? So this is the problem we're having. We're not understanding the culture. So now Claudius, at instigation of Christ, it says, since the early emperors probably viewed Jews and Christians as members of the same religion, and that is true. The whole thing as Christians, Christian, actually it was a derogatory type word in Antioch. It was not a compliment. They were called the way. By the way, this is the reason why I'm starting my own study group. I have a study group. It's called Disciples of the Way. I'm tired of all the mess. Messianics, Hebrew roots, 20,000 branches of Hebrew roots, and Christians, and then quasi-Hebrew roots people. And I got sick of it. So what am I going to do? I work with everybody. I'll teach anybody who lets me teach them. So who are you? I'm a believer in Yeshua who follows the Torah. What do you call yourself? Disciple of the way. It worked pretty good in the first century. No one questioned it. So we refuse to call ourselves the way, but we rather call ourselves by a title that was actually derogatory in the beginning. Yeah, we're followers of Messiah. What's the problem? I get it. So you think Christian, it's not a problem saying Christian. I'm not saying the word is a problem. I believe the denominations that use the word is a problem. Not the word itself. I could say Islam, okay. To submit. Submit to what? To the oppression of the religion. Obviously, the word has been connected with the behavior of those people. Don't you think the same thing has happened in Christianity throughout the history? So let's go back to the title of the first century, Disciples of the Way. That way, there's no issues. Which way? God's way, Derech Hashem. Go back to the first century model. And it's not hiding in a corner, going away to mountains. Sorry, it's not. It's actually being proactive to be in the middle of chaos to become an example of what God and who God is. Not to hide. It's actually to say, no, we serve the God of Israel and we live in this community and we are going to maintain our values, although we recognize you have your way of life. We're going to respect your rule of law, but not adapt to your lack of biblical values. Two different things. You see what I'm saying? All right. So it says, the name Christos may well have referred to Christ. Claudius' remarks may indicate that the Christianity was making inroads in Rome, Syria, and North Africa in early 41 CE. So it was a threat to the empire. Furthermore, Claudius appointed Felix, one of the freedmen, as governor of Judea. Paul would appear for judgment before him. Thus, insight in the person and reign of Claudius gives us much information of what the church faced at this time. This is biblical evidence and historical evidence that points to Paul being a real person. No one can say that Paul did not really live in this world. He lived in humanity. Because it's too accurate. We got to thank the Romans for the historical accounts. They wrote everything down. Praise God for that. You know? All right. So now we know the year. It says that Claudius ordered all the Jews to depart from Rome, and he went to them, and because he was practicing the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, and they were tent makers by trade. And he argued in the synagogue every Sabbath. So I don't understand. So if I go to a synagogue, I'm doing it wrong, but Paul will go to a synagogue and it's okay. Paul will go to synagogue. He will do the liturgy. He will do the Amidah. He will do the prayers. He didn't sit in the corner and not do what they did. People don't want to hear this part. And by the way, this is exactly what I needed to confront myself. I'm thinking, I don't understand what's the problem. If Paul did it, Yeshua will go to a synagogue. Didn't Yeshua go to a synagogue? Did he go to the temple? So I don't understand why we object to have the type of setting as the one that had Messiah. Because we're still adapting. We're still trying to go from here to go to here. God forbid we want to look like Paul. and we're slowly going in. And we do take time to understand where everything comes from, And I get that, but eventually I want you to be aware that the first century congregation was very liturgical. That's a fact. No one can do away with that. That's the order of the service they had. To what extent, I don't know. But surely it was not the way we sometimes think it is. Okay? And he argued in the synagogue every Sabbath, attempting to persuade both Jews and Greeks. By the way, when Paul talks about tongues, please, just don't argue with me right now. Allow me to explain myself. Because everyone wants to just do supernatural stuff, and sometimes it will be great if we understand the fundamentals of physical things and concrete things, and then speculate on the other stuff. I'm not saying the other stuff cannot happen. I'm just saying there's a context. For example, if Corinth was the hub of business, that everyone from the east to go to the west have to stop, and if everyone from the west want to go to the east have to stop, unless you come through Africa, then obviously people were hundreds of different dialects and tongues would have gone through there. Yes? So the word where it says languages or tongues is actually, the Greek word is language. It's a language. Now the angelic language that Paul is talking about is the Hebrew language, because every Jew knows and they believe that was the language of creation. Understand the idioms, understand the customs, understand the context that he's trying to say here. So I think that when he's talking about tongues, and if he's talking about everywhere he goes, Ephesus, thousands of people will go through there. It's one of the hubs in Asia Minor and the west side of Asia Minor. Okay? Same thing in Thessalonica. Same thing in Rome. Same thing in, Rome had 1 million people. That to us is nothing now. But back then, it's like in New York City. How many people from different nations will be there? So if you have a congregation, you have 15 people, or 20 people, 100 people, and half of them speak one dialect, and the other one speak another one, and this guy gets up in his dialect, he has a word of the Lord, he starts speaking, half of us not going to understand. So it's not going to edify anybody. Say, hey, have a translator, guys. Hello, common sense. Let us know what the Lord's telling you. Why is it difficult for us to think that concrete in the real world? Okay, let's put it into practice, okay? Vamos a hablar ahora en español y yo le voy a dar todo el tema en español. Voy a hablar las próximas 2 horas en el idioma en español. ¿Ustedes entienden? You see, I just proved my point. I just told you I'm going to talk the whole time in Spanish if you get it. He said amen to nothing because he didn't know what I said. I know. You follow what I mean? So does that take away the role of the Spirit of God? No. It actually now, whatever God revealed to that person, now he can exchange it with the whole congregation. And Paul is saying, have a translator, guys. Just let everybody know what's going on. Why could it be so simple, be so difficult, and thrown out when it's just logical? I just proved it. You will actually consider me being disrespectful if I continue in Spanish and not give you translation. Right? And you go home, you're going like, I wasted my time. I have nothing. What did he say? Mumbo jumbo to you because you don't speak the language. See? And this is the whole idea. All right, so let's continue reading. Now, when Paul and Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul began to occupy with a message solemnly testifying of the Jews. Okay? It says, verse 7, after leaving, he entered the house of someone named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God, okay? A God-fearer. This is very important. So, now when he is there, he goes to, he comes on a ship to Cenchrea. Locate what's going on. Then you have Ishmael. I'm going to show you a video. I think I took of Ishmael here. Short video of Ishmael. I was in Cenchrea. Oh, this is Ishmael right here. Now, why is Ishmael important? Okay? Why is this place important? Because Paul says you cannot drink of the cup of demons and of the cup of the Lord. Yes? So what does that mean? Well, if you understood the Isthmian Games, they took place every 2 years. Okay? Then you would understand that it happened in the spring. And what happens is, if you're a Roman citizen, you partake of this type of games, and then you have to go to the temples and eat meat sacrificed to idols. You can go to the cafeterias. It involved all kinds of sexual sins. It involved idolatry. It involved eating meat sacrificed to idols. So obviously, Paul is saying you cannot pretend to go to the Isthmian Games and then come over here and sit to have Passover, have the Seder. It doesn't work that way. That is called syncretism. Or in Hebrew, avodah sarah, which is strange worship, strange cult. Okay, if we understood that aspect of it, many things will change among us. So let me read a little bit here. Let me let you go through the video, and hopefully this will be edifying to you. Although the Bible does not mention the place where I'm standing right now, I'm so happy and excited to be here. It's the city of Ishmael. Now, it's interesting because when you read the book of Corinthians, you notice certain language, and then Paul is using the language of athletes, and you're going to get a crown, and you have ran the good race. Well, where I'm standing, they had what is called the Isthmian Games. Let me read you some information about what used to go on here. Not only did they have a temple of Poseidon, which is the god of the sea, and clearly you see how close it is to the Saronic Gulf. So I think it's interesting that when we read the Bible, sometimes we don't pay attention to the culture and the games. Games were important in the Greco-Roman world. So the Isthmian Games, what is this about? Corinth was also prominent because of the Isthmian Games. Now, we're not too far. We're like 10 minutes away from the ancient city of Corinth right now. But remember, it's for the Isthmian Games from Ishmael. And it would just go on to different locations. It's like a type of Olympic type thing, okay? Now, watch. Let me tell you how that took place. The Isthmian Games occurred in the first and the third years of the Olympiad of the 4-year period between Olympic Games. It's like the Pan American Games and the World Games. They do it between the Olympic Games, same thing. They were supposed to originated by the mythical king Sisyphus, and the date is from 523 BC. A competition centered on 3 kinds of events: equestrian, gymnastics, and music. Now, I just learned in the museum here that they were doing pancration, which is some type of wrestling. They did boxing. They also did music type talent shows, and things like that. So they took place here in Ishmael. Now, it says, by the New Testament period, the games were influenced by Roman civilization. So chariot racing and other spectacles were probably added to the Hellenistic competitions. In allusion to athletic contests, Paul mentions both running and boxing. 1 Corinthians, I'm going to, by the way, let me finish and then I'll read the verse. It says, the price of winning the games were a wreath made of myrtle, olive, pine branches, plus additional benefits: stipend from the state, remission of taxes, and a special benefit for the champion's children. Winners were national heroes. So 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 to 26 says, do not know that those who run in the stadium all run, but one receives the prize. Run in such a way that you may win, and everyone who competes exercises self-control in all things. Thus, those do so in order that they may receive a perishable crown. He's talking about what happened here. But we an imperishable one. Therefore, I run in this way, not as running aimlessly. I box in this way, not as beating the air. And I discipline my body and subjugate it, lest someone, after preaching to others, I myself should become disqualified. So now when we read in this particular verses, 1 Corinthians 9, he is using the language of the things that were taking place very near Corinth, or also in Corinth, because the games were being transferred from place to place. It was called the Isthmian Games, and they took place during the spring. Now remember, between imperial cult, the worship of Aphrodite, the worship of Apollo, the worship of Demeter, the worship of Poseidon, and they have cafeterias, and they worship and they sacrifice to them, and they were eating meat sacrificed to idols, plus winning the races. Clearly, Paul is dealing with a lot of cultural backgrounds that needs to be talked about in order for us to get a better understanding of the first century biblical narrative. You see how important it is to understand that? That interesting? Paul is using the language that was practiced in the Isthmian Games and the Olympiads too. When he's talking about beating the air, it's basically called shadow boxing. You know, that's what we do when we practice. He's living in the real world. He's using his environment to share the values of the Torah. What is the imperishable wind? That the wind that we have is not a little wreath of olive. What are we getting as a reward? Eternal life. He is contrasting what they were doing in the games, in which they have to compromise their values of moral behavior and things like that, and dedicating it to the gods that can do absolutely nothing for them. I mean, an athlete is doing it 100% to regain some kind of honor. Like he said, taxes can be remission of taxes, and, your kids can have this. So clearly you're doing it because you want to get some kind of honor, acquiring honor. So you have a good name. Well, the gospel now, Paul is saying, just like you have the athletes trying to do whatever it takes to regain that honor so that their family can have honor, well, guess what? Through Yeshua the Messiah, God is giving you something that those games cannot give you. He'll give you the real reward, eternal life, in exchange for all that dedication that you're spending to become a good boxer and a good wrestler and a good musician and a good singer and whatever. So what he does, he redirects those efforts now to his kingdom. Now he has something to offer. If you do some singing, do it for the kingdom, honoring God as a good client. Singing to be grateful to God, not to perform, but singing to God as a way of saying, thank you for giving me a reward that I can sing to you now, to praise you, to uplift you, to honor you, knowing that when I die, we'll be able to be in the kingdom with you. Thank you for that gift. I want to give my gift of what my talents are to you. You do with them as you please, my king. That's what the kingdom's supposed to be. Let's talk a little bit about Corinth and the Bema. When he went to Gallio, I'm going to actually show you the verse first, and then he spent 6 months, remember. So he stayed 1 year and 6 months teaching the word in Corinth. That's a long time. So obviously they had to have a Jewish community there. Now when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, and Gallio was actually a Spaniard. Gallio was a Spaniard. Gallio Anaos Seneca's son, a brother of the philosopher Seneca, who lived in the year 3 BC to the year 65 AD, born in Cordoba, Spain. How many of you did not know that Gallio was a Spaniard? Okay? So there's a cultural background here. And if you study the history, you know the events that happen in the book of Corinthians are real, because it says Gallio served as Roman proconsul of Achaia, which is that area in Corinth. It's actually a province, sometime between 51 and 53. So now you know that the events that happened with Paul happened between 51 and 53, during the time of Claudius. Get it? So now you're putting together history, geography, topography, and all this information. All right. So, when we keep reading here, it says, the Jews rose up with one purpose against Paul and brought him before the seat of judgment. That's the Bema. Now, in ancient Athens, the Bema was a raised platform used by orators within the law courts, and was likely influenced in the use of the raised pulpit found in many synagogues and churches throughout history. In the New Testament, reference is also made to the Bema as a seat of judgment. Matthew 27:19, John 19:13, Acts 25:10, and Romans 14:10. Okay? And this is the Bema, and I took a picture on it because people don't believe that I was there unless I take a picture. It's a inside joke, guys. And so that's my son recording me, and it's interesting because I'm standing on it, And I'm not talking very loud because I have a mic. It's going directly to the. You want to say something, Mike? Yeah. Okay. So I'm speaking like this. And you know, the Bible says this because the mic goes directly into the camera. Okay. My wife is actually to my left on that picture, under a tree. It was like maybe from here to where you guys are back there. Okay. And I'm not talking very loud. So if I'm talking like this, and I'm in the platform, but she said, I can hear you perfectly. And I'm going, wow, that's cool. So the Bema is a very important place. And when you look into it and you really understand these things, it blows you away because they had it in every place in the Roman Empire. So let me tell you a little bit about the Bema in the video, if it's okay with you guys. In 1 Corinthians. I am standing in a place that to me is very important. It's called the Bema. And this is for us it's important because we have evidence in the New Testament in regards to Paul being brought here in the city of Corinth because he was teaching the gospel in the agora, or in the forum here, in this area here, that they had a place that philosophers, Stoics, and other people trying to express their views about life can stand and they can teach the people. Well, Paul was teaching about the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his son Yeshua. And by the accusation of the leaders in this place, they brought him to Gallio. Now, let me give you some information who Gallio was. Did you know that Gallio was born in Spain? Watch this. It says Gallio, who was Seneca's son, and brother of philosopher Seneca, who lived in the 3 BC to 65 AD, born in Cordova, Spain. He was Spaniard. Okay, and Gallio came to Rome during Tiberius' reign. His given name was Marcus Annaeus Novatus, but he assumed the name Gallio after his adoption. So therefore, he came here. Now, why is this important? Because we have now evidence, historical evidence, apart from the Bible, that tells us that there was a man named Gallio who came here, and he became a proconsul of this particular province. Gallio served as a Roman proconsul in Actia sometime between 51 and 53. During the apostles' first visit to Corinth, the Jews brought the apostle before the proconsul, accusing him of having persuading the people to practice religion in an unlawful way. Now, Gallio, he decided not to press charges. Why? Because Augustus Caesar, he already gave privileges to the Jewish people all over the empire to have the freedom of religion. And that's why when you read the text in the book of Acts, which tells you that you can rule according to your law, that is biblical and historical evidence that what Gallio said is exactly what Augustus Caesar said. And that's why the Jews have free access to the Greco-Roman world in order for them to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and not to mix themselves with the imperial cult prevalent in the city of Corinth. This is, again, one more piece of evidence that tells us how accurate the Bible is. And now we know that Paul is not just some made-up figure. It's a real person in a real location, in a real geography, with some real historical backgrounds to prove his existence and the validity of the Bible. In chapter 18, verse 2, I want to read those first. So do you understand the importance of the historical accounts now? And remember that when you read the text, if you read the text, let's read it carefully, okay? It says, the Jews rose up with one purpose against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat, saying, this man is persuading the people to worship God contrary to the law. Well, he understood which law? That I am in Acts 18, verse 12. Okay? So which law are we talking about? It's not Roman law. It had to do with their own law, because if you continue, it says, but when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, if it was some crime or wicked villainy, or Jews, I would have been justified in accepting your complaint. But if it is questions concerning a word or names and your own law, see to it yourselves. I do not wish to be a judge of these things. Why? Because According to the Roman Empire, they have the freedom to judge within their own jurisdiction, the Torah. No, what I'm saying is that the law here that it's talking about, the accusation, is concerning the way the worship of God. In other words, they're presenting Yeshua. Paul is presenting Yeshua as the Messiah. He's not changing the structure of the synagogue. He's not changing the Torah. He's just giving them the interpretation who Messiah is through the Torah and the prophets, something that we already know he's done throughout the empire, right? But now, because they don't agree with him, obviously it tells you right there, they bring him to the judgment seat. The Jews, yeah. The Jews rose up with one purpose against Paul and brought him before. Because now, remember, he's teaching. Remember yesterday when I read to you the oath of allegiance? So don't you think the Jews are going to use that as a reason to tell Gallio, hey, this guy's teaching about a different Kyrios, a different Lord. Because they don't believe Yeshua is the Messiah. So they're saying, this guy, and also remember one thing, Deuteronomy 13, the prophet and a seer of dreams. You know, they're not in Israel. They didn't witness the resurrection of Yeshua. There's this guy who just comes in and he's telling them, by the way, there's a resurrection. And that resurrected Messiah, he's the one we're looking for. But they don't know the dude. He's there a year and a half, 2.5 years, whatever it was, you know, but I don't know you. I'm getting to know you. Who are you, Paul? Well, and? So in a way, I'm putting myself in their shoes and I'm thinking, well, maybe I would have had a little doubt too if I never saw the witness, if I didn't see it, and I cannot do anything about it. Oh, well, let me take him to Gallio. He's the leader of Corinth. Kick him out. He's creating chaos. We already know they're creating chaos, you know. So you have the people who are not necessarily going to believe you about Messiah all the time, right? Even within Jewish people, you're going to see it. Okay, so we are talking in the context of logic right now. Logically speaking, how you will respond. It's easier for us to make a different judgment because we're far away from the context, and we do believe Yeshua no matter what, that he's the Messiah. So it's hard for us to contrast and to understand what these people are dealing with. Can you imagine you accept Yeshua as the Kyrios and you start proclaiming Yeshua to the whole Roman Empire? The Jewish people will be more of a target. They hated him already. But as long as you stay in your synagogue and you don't bother nobody, leave us alone. We do our worship. We will worship the emperor. You worship your God. You do your business because we cannot stand you Jews, but you're so successful, we need you. That's the way it was. But now the Jews are getting out of their comfort zone and they start saying, hey, by the way, we have this Messiah who actually resurrected from the dead, and God wants you to accept him as the only sovereign, not the gods of Rome. And by the way, God has established and honored his son to the position of Kyrios, the Lord. Oh, wait a minute. So you're telling me that our Lord, the emperor, is no longer powerful enough? No, this one he died in the cross, and then God resurrected him. Wait a minute, your Messiah died on the cross, shamed by Rome, and God resurrected him, meaning that the gods of Rome and the emperor has no power over life and death? The empire is lost. You see, the implications of that in itself, we don't quite understand. Because since I was a kid, they told me about Yeshua resurrected, and I believed it. Never saw it. I never saw Yeshua resurrected, but I believe 100% that Yeshua resurrected. The evidence gives me a lot of proof. So I believe it. Right? But can you imagine the social geopolitical problems in the first century? So it's only logical that they're going to say, excuse me, dude, you don't understand. You're ruining my business, bro. People are going to throw me out of Corinth. I'm no longer going to have money. I'm not going to have status. I'm going to be persecuted. The Roman Empire is going to kill me. They're going to make me slaves. They're going to do this. Okay, hey, Gallio, will you take care of this guy, dude, please? No, it has to do with your law. You deal with it because they're following the law. So this is a great example in the New Testament that lines up perfectly with what they were doing in Roman law, in Roman culture in the first century. It gives us a glimpse into the everyday life. If I was a movie maker, there would be a great chapter on those verses alone. Can you imagine the dialogue? You make a whole dialogue about what was going on in the mindset of the people, the mindset of the Jews living there, dealing with Paul, preaching truth. Many believed, but then all of a sudden the reality is, what if we believe this Messiah is Yeshua, and then that we confess, because now we will be a clients to him. He's our mediator. He's taking us to God. We got to be loyal to him. God has appointed him as the one who will take care of the kingdom on the earth. So now we have to be loyal to him. We cannot be loyal to the emperor in anything. Can you imagine what psychologically that would have done for you and your family? We don't think about that. The same thing. It would completely change the whole perception of who God is, what the gospel is, and who the Messiah is in the whole thing. But we don't study it. You know how much time I got? A couple minutes, perfect. So as we see here, we understand clearly that there's a context of what is going on. And if you allow me, let me put just a few minutes of the Aqua Corinth. Right, let me go. Oh, I'm going to start right here. Okay? We have to separate the holy and the profane. And this location teaches you perfectly what is profane in the eyes of God and what Paul was dealing with in the first century in the First Corinthian church. We are at the zenith, at the top of the Aqua Corinth in Corinth. I mean, this is a beautiful sight. And right behind me, you see the connection between two seas in which commerce was extremely important. And now you can understand why Paul came to this location as a logistically stay here in order to minister to people coming from all over the world. But I want to talk a little bit more about Aqua Corinth, because we are at the top right now. It's a beautiful site. You can see 360 degrees, the beauty of it. And we will talk about the isthmus in a minute, but I want to give you some history about this location. Where I'm standing would have been the location of the Temple of Aphrodite. And I got to tell you, to me, it's incredible to think that these people were so desperate to worship a goddess of fertility that they have to come all the way to the top of the mountain, which is no easy task. But it also tells you something about their mindset. Anyone who would come here, it was premeditated. It was no accident. It's not like you just took the wrong turn to go worship a God not knowing. Here you knew that you came to worship. That included immorality and fornication. Let me give you some more information about the location of the Aqua Corinth. The Acropolis of the ancient city of Corinth, home of the temple Aphrodite. Aqua Corinth is the highest Corinth. It's a great limestone twin summit peak with a linking saddle. It's located southwest of the ancient city of Corinth in the Gulf of Corinth and Saronic Gulf. So you have two gulfs here that connects. Now they connect because of the isthmus. They have a canal there that was finished by the French in the late 1800s. It's very interesting because back in the day, this was a high point, sacred mount, sacred space, cosmic mountain of the Corinth community. You see that in Mesopotamia, in Egypt. You see that all over the world. You see that in Athena. The Parthenon is located in the high mount. It's consistent throughout the ancient Near East in regards to these things. This is located 1,800 feet, 1,886 feet of elevation. Trust me, it's a hike. So here Strabo talks about this place, but it's also well water in all sides. They had a spring coming out of it. I don't know how the water came up here, but they had everything they needed in order to do what they did. It was also protection in history in the Ottoman Empire and the Byzantine period. But we're focusing only on the first century perspective and how the importance of this. What's the biblical relevance of this place? At the site of the Aphrodite temple, the Aqua Corinth is important for understanding the Greco-Roman religious context of Paul's Corinthians epistles. Now, the Athenians likely fabricated a story of the temple of Aphrodite having 1,000 devotee prostitutes. Strabo talks about this. The sexual immorality, 1 Corinthians chapter 5 on, is rampant in the community down below here to my right. Only understanding its location, understanding what you're looking at, you get a perception and you get an understanding of the high level of corruption, moral corruption that was going on in the first century congregation. Now we understand why Paul was so adamant about talking to them about the Torah in the context of holiness according to the standards of the Bible and not according to the culture of its time. It is important to understand that at this high place, many people were coming and mixing the holy and profane. If you live in the Roman culture, Greco-Roman world, to you it was just, okay, I could go and have sex, immorality, but it's worship. Paul now has the challenge to contrast God's righteousness and morality versus the ancient world's perception of justice, worship, and morality. Right behind me.
To know. So when you go to these places, it really enhances when you read the text, you're going to go like, man, now I know what Paul's dealing with. I read 1st and 2nd Corinthians now and I get it. I don't have a problem with that anymore. It's like, man, I know what you mean. I was there. I went to Ishmael. I went to Cenchrea. I went to the Isthmus. I went to Corinth. I went to the Parthenon. I went to Athens. I saw that. So it makes sense. And but by the way, this whole thing is a course. Literally, I'm teaching you a course. And what I'm hoping and that we can accomplish, and I'll finish with this, the first part, is that we will be able to consider researching as part of adding to our worship and our time to meeting together, maybe look into this thing so that when people from the church come, that they've never seen what we do, they can see this type of instruction. They're going to like, oh, so your faith is concrete based on evidence. It's not something that is so far-fetched to understand. Because here we can prove that they were following the Torah in the 1st century. Just the fact that Gallio is telling them, deal with it according to your law. So we have the evidence that they were following the Torah. They're keeping Sabbath. So I don't have to argue with them whether Sabbath is relevant for them or not. I'm just going to present the information. By the way, Paul will go to the synagogue as the custom was. And you just keep going. Because eventually they're going to go, wait a minute. You're not going to find anywhere they're meeting on Sundays. So instead of me having this tug of war of whether Sabbath or Sunday, what does the text says? In context, according to the law. You know that according to the law, they had to meet on Shabbat because of the laws of collegia, having a group and association. And they were given the permission to meet on Shabbat and during the feast times. So don't tell me they're meeting on Sundays unless they are in their homes, which that means something occurred that broke the relationship between the synagogue and the believers in Yeshua, and now they have to meet running for their lives. That's why they were running at home. They were meeting in their houses. And we'll come back for Ephesus after this. And when we come back for Ephesus in the last session, what I want to do is going to give you as much videos as I have on Ephesus. And then after part of the video, I'll tell you a little bit about it, and I think it's going to be edifying to you. Amen? Thank you for joining. Come back right away. What time is the next session? 10:45. We'll come back for the last session on the book of Acts in its cultural background.